Are you sick of watercolor sketchbooks that don't lay flat and have that annoying gutter in the middle? Or maybe you want a sketchbook that's smaller than the standard sizes but can't find one. Maybe you've thought about making your own, but it feels complicated. You start looking up tutorials and all of a sudden you need needles, wax thread, book presses, and more tools that you don't have. Don't worry, this is not one of those complicated tutorials. Today, I'm going to show you a super simple no-sew method for making your own watercolor sketchbooks from loose paper. You can use your favorite watercolor paper, decide exactly how many pages you want, and even make the sketchbook the size that works best for you. And even if you've never made a book before, you can make this sketchbook. I'm excited to share this drum leaf binding method with you because it's a total game changer for watercolor sketchbooks. First off, this method completely eliminates the gutter. Unlike sewn bindings or spiral bound sketchbooks, drum leaf binding has no gap between the pages. With drum leaf binding, you can paint seamlessly across both pages, creating beautiful, uninterrupted spreads. I learned this method from DAS Bookbinding on YouTube, who has a fantastic tutorial on making drum leaf books with full spread photos. I'll put a link below if you want to check it out. Second, it's customizable. You can decide exactly how many pages you want and how big you want them to be. For this project, I'm making a smaller sketchbook with just 8 spreads or 16 pages. I love this size because it's less intimidating and fills up faster. You can make your sketchbook as big or as small as you want. It's totally up to you. Stay tuned after the tutorial and I'll show you a fun way to display your finished sketchbook. You won't want to miss it. It's a cool way to show off your art and it turns your sketchbook into a piece of art itself. All right, let's go over the supplies. These are all basic supplies you probably already have. First, grab 4 pieces of watercolor paper, all the same size and weight. The size of your paper will determine the final size of your sketchbook. For example, if you start with 9 by 12 inch paper, your finished sketchbook will be 4.5 by 6 inches, a quarter of the size of your original paper. The spreads will be 9 by 6 inches or half the size of your original paper. Get a bone folder or a wooden spoon to help press and crease your folds. Grab a couple clips large enough to hold the book together. For glue, I recommend PVA glue, which is perfect for bookbinding because it dries clear and strong. You also need a brush to apply the glue evenly and a small dish to put the glue in. Next, you need 1 extra piece of paper. This could be a blank sheet or an old painting or watercolor sketch, large enough to cover the front and back of your book. And you need a thin piece of fabric to cover the spine. This will help reinforce the spine and give your book extra durability. If you have a scoring board, get that ready too. It makes the folding a little bit easier, but it's optional. You can still do this without it. Now that we've got everything, let's assemble the sketchbook. Before we start making the book, check the grain of your paper. Why? Because folding against the grain can cause cracking and warping. To determine the grain, gently bend the paper both ways. The direction that bends more easily is the grain direction. Most watercolor paper has a vertical grain, especially in pads. But if you're using loose sheets, it's important to check. You want the folds of your book to run parallel with the grain of the paper. Cut your paper in half against the grain. This will give you 2 spreads per sheet, and you'll need 8 half sheets total. Make sure all your pieces are the same size. If they're not, give them a quick trim to make sure they match up. Score each piece of paper in half with the grain. Keep track of which side of the paper is the front. If you're using cold press watercolor paper, the more textured side is usually the front. You want the front of the paper to be on the inside when you fold. If you keep your papers front side up while cutting and scoring, you'll be good to go. Now, fold the papers in half along that score line. I'm using the edge of my scoring board to line up the edges of the paper before pressing the fold. If you don't have a scoring board, make sure you line up the edges and the corners before pressing your fold. Use a bone folder to press the crease. If you don't have a bone folder, you can use a wooden spoon. After all the papers are folded in half, go over the creases again with the bone folder on the front and back sides. Don't worry if you see the paper cracking on the folded edge. This won't be visible in the finished book. Watercolor paper is prone to cracking. The fold inside looks nice and neat, and that's all you'll see when the book is finished. Stack your folded papers back to back. Give the spine a few taps on the table to make sure the folded edges are even and flush. Keep the spine against the table and clip the pages together with binder clips. I didn't have any binder clips or bulldog clips that were big enough, so I grabbed a few clips from my kitchen. If you're making a larger book, you might want to clamp the pages between two boards, but for these small books, clips alone will do the trick. Now, flip the book over so the spine is facing up and brush a generous coat of PVA glue along the spine. Work it into the cracks between the folds so everything sticks well. Keep the pages clipped together while you're gluing. Now, grab your fabric for the spine. Cut it to the height of the pages and the width of the spine plus 1 inch. Lay the fabric face down on some scrap paper and brush on a layer of PVA glue. Press the glued side of the fabric onto the spine, then fold it over the front and back of the book and press it in place with your fingers. The fabric gives the spine extra durability and a nice finished look. Even though I cut my fabric to match the height of the spine, when I glued it on, it stretched a little bit, so I'm going to use small scissors to trim off the excess. Allow the spine to dry completely before you open the book. I recommend about an hour, but feel free to wait a little longer to make sure it's fully set. While the spine is drying, you can get your covers ready. Choose an old painting or watercolor sketch that you want to use for the cover, or use a piece of blank paper that's the same weight as your inside pages. For my first book, I used an abstract watercolor piece that I cut to size for the covers. The cover paper was a different brand, but it's the same weight as the pages I used for the inside of the sketchbook. For this new sketchbook, I'm using a page I had fun stenciling all over with watercolor. Check out my stenciling hack video to see how I get these crisp results and smooth blends with watercolor. My cover paper is the same size as the papers I use to make the inside of my sketchbook, so I only need half of it for the covers. I cut it in half crosswise, and then I cut the top in half again. These 2 quarter pieces should fit the front and back covers of my book perfectly. Set these aside for now. We're not attaching them yet since we want the spine to be completely dry and we still have some gluing to do on the inside pages. Now for the magic. We're using drum leaf binding for this watercolor sketchbook because it's a low glue method that prevents warping, it dries quickly, and it opens completely flat without a gutter in the middle, which is a complete game changer for watercolor artists that love to paint full spreads. Basically, we're going to glue the back sides of the pages together so only the front sides are visible in the finished book and there's no crack between the pages. To do that, we're going to use a minimum amount of glue. It's called drumming, which in bookbinding means to attach something only at the edges. Flip your book over and start working from the back of the book. Open the first spread, which has a fold down the center, and slip in a piece of waxed paper. This will protect these pages from excess glue. Flip over the next page, and where you see a crack between the pages, apply a thin strip of glue along the spine side and the foredge. You only need a 1/4 to a 1/2 inch strip of glue on each side. Slide out the wax paper so any excess glue isn't touching your pages. Press the left page onto the right where you applied the glue. Then use a clean bone folder to apply pressure on the glued edge. Slide out the wax paper a little more to keep any excess glue from sticking to your pages. Repeat this process to glue all the back sides of the pages together. Remember, don't apply glue to the spreads with a fold down the center. Insert wax paper to protect those pages while you glue the backs together. Only apply glue on the pages where you see a crack down the center. Now we can attach the covers with the same drumming method. Put the front cover face down on a piece of scrap paper. Apply a 1/2 inch strip of glue along the 2 long edges. Then flip the cover over, line it up with the front of the book, and press the glued edges in place. Because we used fabric to cover the spine, we can attach 2 separate cover pieces. This is a quick and easy way to cover the sketchbook that looks great and doesn't require constructing a full wraparound cover. Repeat the same process to attach the back cover. Make sure to line up the edges of the cover with the edges of the book before pressing down. The PVA glue adheres pretty fast, but gives you a little working time to get everything lined up. Now it's time for the hardest part, waiting. Place your sketchbook under a stack of heavy books and leave it to dry completely overnight. Resist the urge to open and play with it before the glue has cured. I promise it'll be worth the wait. The next day, carefully remove the heavy books and waxed paper. You now have a beautiful, fully functional watercolor sketchbook. Each spread opens flat with a clean fold in the center, no gutter, and pages you can paint across without interruption. The fabric spine bends smoothly with the pages and doesn't get in the way of the book opening flat. The double thickness of the pages is a nice, sturdy surface to paint on. One unique thing about this book structure is the pages have an opening at the top and bottom, but unless you're looking for it, you wouldn't really know it was there, especially with the thick watercolor paper. Another bonus with this sketchbook is how you can display it when you're done filling it up. You can use a small clip to hold the covers together and the pages will fan out like a sculpture. It's a cool way to see all your spreads at once. It creates a unique interactive display for your art and turns your sketchbook into a piece of art on its own. Plus, it's a great conversation starter if you want to share your creative process with friends and family. The drum leaf binding method is perfect for watercolor artists that love to paint full spreads. And it's easy to make even if you're a beginner. If you enjoyed this project, check out my handmade book playlist for more bookbinding tutorials. Thanks for watching. Now go make some sketchbooks.